So today I'd like to discuss my trajectory, so to speak, and why. Okay, so I'll never forget the meeting we had between my mother and father. And of course, I was a bit of I didn't always follow every rule, as most kids don't. Well, maybe they all do, except me, but anyway. So I was in high school, and high school for me was relatively straightforward. We moved from Fishkill or Beacon to Poughkeepsie around between 8th grade and 9th grade, okay? And so I was introduced to Arlington High School, which is completely different than my old school. My old school was in the North Bronx, between Tuckahoe and New Rochelle. And of course, down there, it was more of an immigrant area and also a tough neighborhood. And I got beat up several times on the school grounds. And I learned to avoid conflict. Anyway, and so the trees was the school we had there was an old school. And when I say old school, it was like an old building beside a big tree, and it had a lot of deficiencies as these buildings get older, old construction and so forth, and old sewer, power, and water. Anyway, and so when I fell sometimes by the tree, they had big roots that came out and sort of curved over. And so when I lost the fight, I fell down and hurt my knees. One time I hurt both knees pretty badly, but I didn't tell my mother, of course, because then she would get all in a rage and go rage against us, whatever. They blamed somebody else, but it was my fault. And then my mother decided that we needed a new school, and so she and a group of parents got together and said. And they've started having meetings and getting community support for a new school. And they finally built a new school. And by then, my mother, Arlene Allen, was head of the group. But there was a whole bunch of leaders in there. Anyway, I guess they put her in charge because she had more time. She's not working, and maybe others were working, and so they put her in charge, and they finally, in multiple public meetings, she got the community to agree to a new school. Okay, so they built a new school, and it was very nice. And however, it wasn't finished until after I was gone, so I never got into the new school. And so. And then the question came up, what are we going to name the school? And many members who remember my mother being so dedicated to a new school, they wanted to name it Louis Endsley School. But that was just a community member. They wanted some bigger name on that, so they chose Admiral Forster. Admiral Forster was a local native there, and also was in the Navy, and he was an admiral, I guess, maybe at least an admiral probably. And so they named the school after him, as they should have, in my opinion. Although you got to give credit where credit's due, but they wanted a big name on the school, a popular name, because he had just finished World War II and had very successful battles in the Navy, and so. Remember, it was just near. It was the end of World War II, and so they wanted to celebrate the end of World War II and also a famous name from their area. Okay, fine. So we moved to Poughkeepsie, New York, and I was introduced to the school there, and it was completely different. There were young people; they were dressed normally, and no one was fighting that I know of. And I got into the beginning of 9th grade. And so what happened was, there were all the subjects in the morning and the early afternoon, and then after that you got a few who are academically getting good grades, or passing grades at least. You got to go out to different events. You could go to football or basketball, and you could go to performances on the stage with guidance, or you could go to several other clubs. But the first year, because I had no criteria of being able to get passing grades during the homework part, and near the end of the day, I had to sit in my class. I was not allowed to go anywhere. So what I did was okay, here are the books, and let's go through and see what we got. And so I went through all the books and studied it all, and especially concentrated on all the lectures they gave us. And so when the grades came out, the teacher came back. I was sitting in the back of the room at that time. The teacher came back and said, you know what? I said, no, what? She said, you got very good grades. I said, well, thank you very much for that. And I said, what were they? She was mostly A's and B's. Wow. I just got this. Well, it was the first month or two in the school. I was already getting A's and B's. And she said, well, if this continues, we'll allow you out of class in the last period, where you can go choose what you want to do. And so in the beginning part of it, I chose athletics, pretending like I knew anything about athletics. I was never in full physical shape, and I never really had any legacy of a football player or basketball player in my world. And so I enjoyed playing the sports. I was always the last one. What I learned was I was not in the fast lane. In fact, I studied up on it. There's fast muscles and slow muscles by genetics. And I did not get the fast muscles in my legs to be able to run 10 or 10-minute miles, or not 10-minute miles, but the mile, or the 200 or the 440. I was not fast enough to keep up with them. However, the one thing I learned was this: I could run a mile without stopping. Now, a lot of people can't do that. Even when they try to go slow, and of course I was going slower than most. So I probably would have been better in cross country. I'm not sure they had it at our school. I don't remember it. Anyway, so when it came time to graduate, I was 9th in the class, and my best friend, Larry Sharp, who was very smart, he was 5th in the class. I think he was about much more, and he was an incredible guy. He was very good in academics. He was very good in football. He was very good in, he was less good in basketball because he was shorter, and but a great guy. And he calculated what you need to do to get a touchdown, and also decided what he needed to do to get a point after. And so what he did was he was short and stout and above average fast, and so he figured out how to run to the line and jump over the center and then gain some yards. And of course, when the other side figured that out pretty quickly, so in the early part of the game, he could always make yards. Anyway, so that was that. And then, so I was 9th in the class. One of the reasons I was 9th in the class is because the driving teacher, I'd never driven a car. These other guys had driven cars on the farm or wherever they were living. And so my car driving skills were average, and maybe not so average. And one time, there was a red light, and I slowed down and stopped at the red light, But the teacher said, well, you were much too slow to put on the brakes. You got to start earlier. Okay, thank you, sir. And then he gave me a D in the course. But I still got my driver's license. And that D in the course put me back a few more, anyway, slowed me down in getting a position in the class. And so I applied to colleges. So my mother and I sat down with what college are we going to apply to? And she said, well, I heard Harvard is very good. And I also heard Yale's very good. So we had two places we were going to apply to, okay? I didn't have high hopes I was going to get into those two, because in those days, it wasn't the academic performance or future prediction of performance. It was, legacy was still in force, where the previous graduates of Harvard were sending their sons to, and getting, everybody knew they had a little bit more preference. And so I didn't get into Harvard or Yale, and so down the street there was a guy by the name of Lawatch. And this Lawatch guy, very nice guy, he was a big salesman for an overseas approach to milk purification, or milk, making it safe. And he was a salesman. And one day he invited me to join them. There was some big wigs from the Norwegian company that was making these places and these machines. And I sat in the back row, and I watched a super salesman at his peak just talk to them, listen to all their questions, answered all their questions, very friendly. And if they criticized the company because it didn't do this or didn't do that, he would always acknowledge it. He would take responsibility. He would say, yes, that's true, and this is what we've done to correct it, and it's working pretty good, we think, and we ask you to keep studying the results in your own space and let us know if there's any problems with them. So in other words, he was open-minded. He wasn't just pushing them on and said, this is the best in the world, blah, blah, blah. No, he never did that. Anyway, so that. And so I got to know him, and he was, so I was trying to go to college. They said, oh, maybe you could go to my college. I said, what college is that? He says, Colgate. Colgate, never heard of Colgate, except as a toothpaste. And no, he said, I could write you a letter of reference. Give me your transcript. So I gave him my high school transcript, and he wrote a letter supporting me. I'm sure that's the only way I got in. Now, he was an alumnus, and so maybe I was taking advantage of that legacy part too. Anyway, so I went to Colgate, and when I got there, I went to the admissions office, and I was assigned, there were graduate students there who were getting paid to help with the admissions, because there was much more admissions than there were places. And so the guy I got assigned was a guy in English, and he didn't know anything about science or math. And so they said, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a doctor. And that year, 100 students that got accepted at Colgate said they were going to be doctors. And just as a quick aside, at the end of our fourth year, only 9 of the 100 got accepted in medical school. I was one of them, thank God. Anyway, and during that time, of course, the Vietnam War was going on, and of course, so I went through Colgate, and in the first year or two, I got A's and B's in science and math and calculus and so forth and physics. But the other classes, I said, this doesn't really seem to help me be a doctor, so I didn't pay much attention to them as I should have. And also, there was the Bay of Pigs came out, and I was glued to the TV to see what the hell the Bay of Pigs was going to do. It was an interesting aside, but not helping my medical career. And so in the junior year, I decided to leave Colgate and go abroad to more training. So I chose the University of Edinburgh, and I got accepted. And so I went to the University of Edinburgh, and they had chemistry and advanced chemistry, and I took both of those because that was my major. But they didn't have any subsidiary things like like, well, they had calculus too, of course, but they didn't have any subsidiary things like personal relationships or psychology or geography or underwater basket weaving of the Navajo Indians, anyway, or something like that. Anyway, and so then I went ahead and went through all those. And my academic career would never be accepted today. It was mostly science and math, good grades, but all the rest were C's. I had about 3 semesters of C's and everything. German, all the different things, many other subjects, anyway. Of course, my grandmother was German, so I always thought I was going to learn German at her request, and she wrote me letters in German. But of course, I couldn't read them, so I found a German person or student, and he would let me know what the letter said. Then I'd write her back, reflecting on the letter. Anyway, and so when I graduated, now I should go back to my original acceptance at Colgate. So I applied to 3 colleges: Harvard, Yale, and Colgate. I got accepted at Colgate. I got turned down at Harvard and Yale. So I don't know what I would have done if I didn't get accepted at Colgate, because I had no plan B. And then, so I got accepted for an interview at Colgate, okay? And so when I met Frederick McCandless. He was head of the psychology department. And in my application, I said I wanted to go like Albert Schweitzer to Africa and help people who are in need. And so I was interested in international posting. And so and it turned out Fred McCandless was leading every summer for 3 months a group of people going to British Guiana, where there was rudimentary care. It was nowhere near as fast-paced or as in-depth as Colgate in the education. And so I then came back, and my senior year in college, I had forgotten that how fast-paced the junior year in Colgate was. And so I'd done thermodynamics, and I started my senior year with no knowledge of thermodynamics, and they were taking off from there and going higher. And so I couldn't keep. I tried to keep up with what I had missed in junior year, and also the nuclear part of chemistry for the future. And I got a D, luckily. There were 9 students in the class that year in senior chemistry, 4th grade, fourth year. And the professor, Seeley Brown was his name, he said, "Now I just want to let you know in advance that I mark on the curve. And what the curve means to me is that of the 9 students, 1 will get an A, 1 will get an F and fail. B and D will get B and D will get, well, the A's will be A, of course, and then the B's will get, the second in the class will get a B, third in the class will get a C, and then on to fail. So I tried my best to try to keep up with all these topics that I had missed, which I probably should have just gone back into the 3rd year and get thermodynamics and other things that they were doing that I had no idea. When I was in Europe, I got interested in atomic weapons, automatic weapons, atomic bomb, I actually talked about a lot. And what I realized is that if we kept, and at that time, America and Russia were both doing test bomb explosions in the atmosphere, okay? Now that, when I was doing my reading, a bomb in the atmosphere will be blown to whatever way the wind was blowing that day, and the people who lived underneath it, and this would be a whole country, would have the chance of getting cancer in older age, or maybe even initially. And so I joined the protest movement. We called it the anti-nuclear testing in the atmosphere. And I got involved in, because I was an American, we were in England, the question came up, well, Englishmen can be against the bomb, but America doesn't care about it. Oh no, I cared about it, and so I gave certain lectures at certain places. The one place I remember giving a lecture was in Dunoon. Dunoon was a port on the side of England, and they had a lot of people against the nuclear testing, and so I joined them and I gave a lecture, of course, there from my studies. And one of the things I remember most of that lecture was that I told them that it's not America or Russia are going to get us in trouble. It's the American gray squirrel. And they all said, American gray squirrel, that's going to cause a nuclear war? I said, well, yes, what happens is the gray squirrel chews through the lines between the device that sets off the bomb and also the airplane that drops it. And so in America, they had chosen the Bikini Island, an island in the Pacific, and they were going to drop either their atomic or their hydrogen bomb then on this island and just sort of see what happens. And then the question came up, how far back should they be? And they didn't know for sure, because they didn't know how wide it spreads, the atomic bomb spreads. So they built houses where they thought was about 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles from the bomb blast, and they shot off the bomb. And then they measured how much atomic material went into the sky, in little, like rain flowing everywhere. And so this atomic bomb residue in the air was blown toward Europe. They expected it to be blown toward the North Pole, but it was blown toward Europe. This was the Russian bomb, by the way. And so then the word came out that the atomic material is in the grass. And so, and so what they found was the cows were eating the grass, and the grass, when they checked it, had atomic material in their exit in their excrement. And so that enraged everybody, because the word went out and the law went out that no children should drink milk from any European country that was part of the bomb blast. And so, of course, that changed a lot of people saying, what do you mean you can't drink milk because there's nuclear material in it? Oh my God, why is there nuclear material in it? Well, because we just shot the bomb off in Russia, and it blew over Europe. And so I continued in the ban the bomb movement, so to speak, learned a lot about atomic weapons at the time, although they're completely changed now. And also, there was a bill came up before the United States Senate, and when all this material came in to judge what the American position was going to be on atomic bomb testing in the atmosphere, thank God, President Kennedy signed that there will be no more nuclear testing in the atmosphere, and he signed the bill. And so thank God that might be over, and it was. So neither Russians or Americans ever since then ever shot a bomb off in the atmosphere. What they did was they drilled down about 2,000 feet or more and did underground testing of atomic bombs, blowing up the surface of the heart deep in it. And So all along I thought to myself, you know, I'm an American. I want to go to medical school. And so this is a great thing to be behind, helping the people preserve themselves from atomic weapons in the atmosphere. And so in one of my protests, it was in Glasgow, the head of the Glasgow American embassy there, it's not called an embassy, it's called something else, but I forget that what it is. And so he called me in to talk to me. He was going to interview me. Why the hell's an American over here fooling around with the British government? And so he interviewed me and says, well, sir, why are you so much against the bomb? I said, well, because I went through all the medical thing on how much people could get cancer from it. And then he said, well, I just want to warn you that American people, the American government is now saying, if you're against the nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, you're anti-American. Okay, that's what he said. And by the way, if it may interfere with you running for political office in the future. I was about 19 years old, 20, and I said, so they're going to call you a communist. So if they call you a communist, you might not be able to run for political office in the future. I said, look, I thought I was 21. It'll be about 40 years until I'm a doctor. At least I'll know that I participated in health world. And they said, yeah, probably, but so I realized that I was not going to be ever running for political office. If they brought up, they had called me a communist when I was young. So that exited one career, which I didn't care about particularly. Because I was trying to be a doctor. So finally the time came to apply for medical school. And so I applied to medical school. I applied to 3 medical schools. Yale again, and I applied to the University of London, which is a very good medical school. And I applied to Albany Medical College. My chief of anatomy in the class knew people in Albany, and so he said you should apply there too, because they often take local students. Okay, fine. So I applied to all 3. And as my usual pattern is, I got turned down at Yale, got turned down in London. The London people wrote a very nice letter. They said, we want to thank you very much for your application, but as you know, America is no longer a colony. So if you're no longer a colony, we cannot count you as, because you left England, so we're not allowed to accept anybody from America currently. Okay, fine. So they canceled me. And of course, Yale didn't think I had a good enough approach, and so they turned me down. So I was supposed to go to Albany. So I had an interview in Albany with these terrible grades, mostly C's. But this was the Frederick McCandless was heading the group that goes down every summer with some junior and senior medical students to British Guiana. And so we went down there. We were scheduled to go down there, and then we had to be held back for about, I think, several weeks, because they were having a revolution down there. And the question was, would the communists win, or would the British Guiana, would the British win? And so it turned out that the British won. And so they had an election, and the fellow who won was trying to be neutral to everything. And so we got to go there. It was a 100-bed hospital, and they assigned me to the women's unit to begin with, later the men's unit. And on the way down there was a party for us in Trinidad. And in Trinidad, we went to this party, and I had had too much to drink and maybe other drugs. I don't know what it was. And so we were at the bar, and there was a girl across the way, looked very pretty. She was chatting with people. And then I sort of went over near her, but she sort of didn't pay attention. So I said, in order to get her attention, I'll try to have her, I'll show her my dreams. My dreams were, for several years before, I dreamed I was flying in my dreams, okay? And so I thought, well, I'll just go over the window and I'll alert her that I'm gonna jump out and fly. And so I jumped out and I fell down and broke my knee in 6 places, my left knee. And when Dual came over, the guy I was with, he said, okay, we'll go back to the place. So I couldn't walk. So he held my left side up, and I got back to our hotel, which was close by, thank God. And then the next day, I got up out of bed and fell down on the floor because my left knee didn't work and sort of swollen double the size. So I went to the hospital, and it was, of course, a long wait. And so on the intake, I said, I'm probably going to need a cane or something. And they said, okay, we'll put you down for a possible cane. So Dual, my partner, he went in, he just walked into the emergency room, walked right through it back to the cast room in the back. And he got a pair of crutches. And they said to him, what are you doing? He said, well, out front, and they asked me to come back and get some crutches for the guy out front. So they said yes. And so after that, I used the crutches to get around. And whenever a picture was taken, I put the crutches behind me. So when they got the whole thing and sent it home to your mother or father, I never told them I had a broken knee. Anyway, so that was okay. I continued on the tour and got home. And but before I got home, there was another party for us in British Guiana. Remember, that happened in Trinidad, now in British Guiana. And so I was standing by the bar, and one of the younger, not younger, not so young actually, more senior residents, and they didn't have a special group of orthopedic surgeons versus trauma surgeons anyway. So the emergency room would just cover them down there because they didn't have specialists. So he said, what are you doing? I said, oh, why are you standing over here? I said, well, my knee sort of hurts. Sort of hurts? He said, what do you mean by that? I said, I think I sprained it. He said, you sprained it. Can I feel your knee? Sure. So he went down and felt my knee. He said, oh my God, it's double the size. It's probably full of blood. He said, if you want to, I can take you over to our clinic, which is right nearby, and stick a needle in there and take out blood if there is any. Fine, do that. So I said also, because they don't have anesthesia at night, I had two shots of whiskey to try to get the pain better. And so I went over there and he put a needle in. I got 75 cc's, which is huge for a knee. A knee probably has about 10 or 15 cc's. Got 75, and it was all swollen. So he said, look, why don't you come over tomorrow and we'll put a cast on it. A cast? I'm not sure I don't need a cast yet. I should do. So I went over to his place and he put a cast on me from the mid-thigh to the mid-calf. And so for the first few days, as the swelling in the knee slowly got better, that was okay. And then a little while later, and I had a quote follow-up visit, so I went over there and he wasn't available. So what I did was I reached over and got the cast shears. So I cut the cast off. And I was limping around pretty good. And then I saw the young surgeon who had taken the blood out of my knee. He says, what are you doing up? I said, well, without a cast. He said, without a cast. I said, well, I'm just getting around. And he said, well, that cast should be on for 6 weeks. I said, 6 weeks? That's an awful long time. So I came in at his request. He put another cast on. And then, are we running out? Okay, speed it up. Okay. And so anyway, that was the knee part. When I got back to the States, they took x-rays. I had 6 little pieces of bone in the knee from a fragmentation of the joint. And they wanted to do surgery right away. But I just received an acceptance for an internship in California. And I had a clutch car. We have to have both feet to move the car forward. And so I turned down a surgery. I said, I gotta get to California, and I can't, and they want to make it another 6 weeks in a cast. I said, I can't do 6 weeks in a cast, I'm due tomorrow, or within a few days. And so I drove out to California, and I never had the surgery on my knee. And then when I went to the chief of surgery in California, they actually, and I was still in New York, and they said, well, if you don't have the surgery, in 20 years you might have arthritis in your knee. You know, as a 21-year-old young man, or 22-year-old man, 20-year-old man, say 20 years sounds an awful long time away. A little arthritis in my knee in 20 years, that's okay. I don't want to have a surgery now. So they let me go, and I went to California and started in the next leg of my journey of education.